Now we're going to take a look at the more in depth into the terrain options and just basic terrain options. So I'm going to create a standard terrain, and we're not using procedural. I'm going to double click on it and open up our terrain editor. And I'm going to switch this to our 3D view so we can fully see our terrain, and go to options. Now under options we have a lot of different variables we can change. We have a noise distribution, an altitude distribution, and also a seed. And underneath that we have the more amplitude selections, and I'll show you that in just a minute when we start editing those settings. But let's take a look at the seed really quick. Now there's already pretty much a preset library of different terrains, and they all have seed numbers on them. And by typing in a number, we can select a different seed. So in other words, an entirely unique terrain based on a specific number, which means you can also go back and select the same terrain just by typing in the seed number. But we can also go through and just see what's available by typing in random numbers and seeing what sort of terrains they create. And we can see we have a different type one right here. Go to options, I'm going to type in seed and type in 15, click OK, and now we have an entirely different type of terrain. And it helps if you can remember the numbers sometimes if you have something specific you're looking for, but they are almost entirely different with every single number. So it does create a different type of effect every single time, or with every single seed, so you'll have to kind of remember which ones you were working with. But another thing we can do besides that is edit our noise distribution and our altitude distribution by using a filter. So I'm going to edit our filter here and just add a couple of key points, change this to curves, and just kind of edit this around. And we can also see, while we're editing this, the preview in our horizontal profile, which is very helpful to have. And we can see how each little one of these changes is modifying our terrain quite a bit. I'm going to click OK, and now adjust our altitude distribution by adding a few key points, changing this to curves, and then editing this as well. And we can say that we have an entirely different type of terrain now. I'm going to click OK, and OK again, and you can see that created a rather interesting looking terrain, where we do have the top all cut off, and what we could do is either edit that down, but the reason that's happening is because we are clipping out on the bottom or on the top of our altitude distribution filter. So I can select this keyframe right here and just kind of bring that down so it's just underneath our clipping range. Click OK, and now you can see we have a really neat looking terrain where we have this little dip in there, but it's not clipped out anymore. And it's a pretty interesting looking shape. We could actually go in and just edit filters and create different terrains from that, at least as far as the standard terrains, as opposed to creating fractal terrains or function editor controlled terrains. I'm going to click OK and create another one here. You can see we have an extremely interesting looking terrain now. We've got sort of a wall around this whole area, and then inside pretty much about the same thing but a little more varied. So that could create some very neat looking renders and very unique looking terrains. We also have the option of changing some of our settings in here. And if we just take a look at our horizontal profile, we can see exactly which one, exactly what these are doing and how they are affecting our terrain, which is usually the easiest way to edit these, is just by watching the top and seeing exactly what's happening. And now you can see we made it a lot tighter. There's a lot more detail in there, but it can be a little bit overwhelming, especially with these settings. But we can go back and change that and lower that down, smooth it out just a bit, and just go ahead and edit these until we get exactly what it is we're looking for. And even go back and edit the filters if we wanted to, and make changes that way. So it's a very neat little extra options we have within our terrain editor to create some very neat looking standard terrains. And we can also use these settings along with painting. So we can go ahead and edit this now, maybe dig out some areas and edit what we've created. And that way we're not completely bound to those options that we typed in. And we can just lower those areas if we wanted to, sort of in the center. And we can just still edit this even though we created it by using filters. So it's a pretty neat little thing we've got there. We could carve out maybe a little lake coming in. And then we have these areas clipping on the outside, which can sometimes be a problem. What we can always do is just kind of take a small brush and size it down and just work along those edges so you can take care of any of those problems you're having if it's touching the outer rim, which will show up as a weird rendering error because what you'll have is a flat side of the terrain or a part of the terrain that's actually sort of invisible and you can see underneath it. So we're just going along the edges and removing that so we can see just that bit of dark green on the bottom so that we know it's not touching the outer edges of the object. So I can click OK. And we could use this to add a material onto, maybe add some water, grab our terrain, select maybe one of the rock materials, brown layers, click OK. You can see we kind of got a pretty neat looking terrain there. And we can always up the resolution as well. Double click on our terrain, times that by 2, and by 2 again. So now we have a 1024 by 1024 pixel resolution terrain, which is going to look a lot better than that 256 by 256 terrain. But it's just another way to model out your terrains without having to use either the function editor and just more flexibility to your standard terrains, because a lot of people use only the function terrains and the procedural terrains, but the problem with those is they can create some very long render times. If it's completely essential to be using procedural terrains, then of course use them, but there's quite a bit of flexibility with these standard terrains.